you are what you eat, and you very much absolutely are what you read. You are the product of everything that you have read, and you can only ever write well if you read well. You can tell when someone writes something and hasn't ever read anything because they think that like nobody can tell that they used Claude or ChatGPT. I know that you use Claude. Like, please stop.
3.7 alpha build.
Gosh, read as much as possible. There's so much good stuff out there. Like, why would you deny yourself that by saying like, "Oh, I'm scared to read classics"? It's like, no.
Time travel, like that's the
Yeah, exactly. Like, what do you mean? I'm like suddenly accidentally on the battlefield of Waterloo. Like, what do you mean I'm not supposed to be here? I have yet to read an Austen that I like actually enjoy. I know this is my controversial opinion. Controversial opinion.
Austen sucks.
Of course, every French person's favorite thing, clearly. Seduction, manipulation, lots about power. They're just terrible, terrible people. And I know I'm supposed to go, oh, these people are terrible. But it's kind of a feeling of like, oh, these people are terrible. Like, tell me more what happens next.
Solomon and Smith. Welcome to Solomon and Smith. I'm Jack Truckenpeddler. That is Milo Garner. Neither one of us is Solomon or Smith, but together we are Solomon and Smith. Today we're joined by Emma Schilders.
Hello. Hello.
Emma's going to take us through her favourite novels, decade by decade.
I physically have my list here.
Oh, great.
So let me just
Okay.
flip it the right way around.
Wow.
And there's loads of stuff on the floor as well. Oh no, they're all going to fall in the wrong order. An annoying,
This
like,
is good
bag
material. Bringing
running-
a cartoonishly large pile into frame.
I know. This isn't even that bad for me. Like,
Emma has a YouTube channel where she talks about books, her favourite books, how books look, how books smell, how books are to read, characters in books, plots in books, books over here, books over there. And she's talking specifically about her favourite novels decade by decade of the 18th century. A time of poofy wigs, fluffy white ploofy wigs and pretty dresses. Emma initially proposed a list going from 1650 to 1850, but she moderated it for reasons that she will explain.
annoyingly, because I wanted to like focus on fiction, you really only start getting proper novels as we know it more towards the 18th century. And so my list actually now is going to start from 1710s to the 1840s.
Welcome to the channel, if you've never been here before. Milo and I talk about all sorts of things with all sorts of guests. Mostly books, but we also chat a bit about films, a bit about philosophy, a bit about dolphin biology. You know, a couple of deep dives on dolphin biology coming up. Don't miss them. Don't fall into this attitude of, oh, dolphins aren't very interesting. Yeah, well, wait till you see dolphin cells. Anyway, yeah. Subscribe to the channel if you've not subscribed already. Leave a comment down below with your own lists. Please like the video. It was a real delight to talk to Emma. I hope she comes back on the show to talk about something else in future. Welcome to all Emma's people. Great to have you here. Emma's people and our people. Don't fight with each other, okay? They might not be as interested in dolphin biology as us. Like, leave them alone. Oh, by the way, if you want to make a list and be interviewed by us about your list, please get in touch with us. The more the merrier. This is one where, you know, there's no barrier to entry. Come on the show. There's no judgment on this one. This is favourite books. This isn't like, the best books. These are just the favourites. We'd love to talk to you about books, about anything else as well. If you're really into dolphin biology, I mean, it goes without saying. That's gonna do Mr. Beast numbers.
The only reason we're not starting like with the 1700s, like bang on, is because I just couldn't like find something that I liked for the 1700s. So our list for today's purposes is starting, in the 1710s, and we're going all the way up to 1840s, mainly because like I wanted to just cut myself off at one point. Otherwise, you know, with the long 19th century, we're just going to keep going forever.
It's interesting. One of our last guests said that like she started really getting into her list around 1840. She said like the golden age, as she saw it for fiction or for the novel, was that 1840 to 1920 section. I wonder what made you initially attracted to the 18th century, whether in your studies or now. What's interesting about 18th century novels?
I'm going to start so like basic with this in terms of like when I was 10, I watched Sofia Coppola's movie of Marie Antoinette for the first time. And the way that like had an absolute chokehold on just my entire existence since then, like the obsession with the 18th century, like Rococo, like everything to do with especially like the French 18th century, that like aesthetically just set me up to just be like, oh, pretty dresses, champagne, wine, frills, awesome. And then when you get like more and more into it, you're like, oh, there's a lot, the French 18th century, there's a lot of stuff in here. Significantly more interesting than the English 18th century, which I think is very just calm. But the continent is doing like more interesting stuff, shall we say. So I think it really starts with like enjoying the like 18th century aesthetics and then just like not wanting to just read English literature. Because like my mother is an academic, so she's done so much Italian stuff and French stuff. She was the one who was like introducing me to things that you don't like always like usually get taught in school. And so that was just much more interesting to me. But then also, if you're reading stuff in translation, often the translations are the language is often easier to read than like 18th century English things.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
it's like a weird like circumvention of like texts that are difficult to read in English. So yeah, I just found them like easier to read and that kind of just all like worked together really well for me and I just really liked it. So a lot of like 19th century stuff that I know is really popular with a lot of like people reading English, I've like come to that later just because I was like, you know, minding my business with all the like fun 18th century translations. So that's like the main reason I think, weirdly practically and aesthetically driven.
How many languages do you read in, Emma?
Just in English, honestly, because I mean, my French is much better with multiple glasses of wine. I speak Flemish, but it's something that I tend to speak rather than read, unless my mum is texting me or my grandma. So yeah, just English for novels, but I'm working on it.
Looking forward to your list. Let's jump into it. The 1710s.
Lovely. So we're starting off. I personally think we're starting off quite strong, with the only person who has two entries on this list, sort of. We're starting off with this, like, hell, I think this like edition of Robinson Crusoe looks like those like 1980s like sexy romance books. Like it's the shirts down, the billowing hair. I love it. I think this is such a silly translation, not translation. What a silly edition. I did this for a module at uni, which was like the novel in like rise of a novel in 18th century Europe, and you can tell that I read it at uni because it's highlighted in highlighter, which is horrendous. But it's like one of these like very early adventure and travel novels. You also get like Gulliver's Swift, which is like
Gulliver's
I think
Travels,
it's,
yes.
yeah, Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift, which is 1726. So that's like very like quite closely grouped together. And this is about a man who is on a voyage and he gets shipwrecked on a desert island off the south coast of America, the Caribbean. So it's quite fun because this is part of this like age of exploration, like trade routes are, you know, the world is becoming significantly smaller in the 18th century and more people are going out and coming back and telling everyone about their travels. And so it's also one where, yeah, the world is less big and it's less scary, but it's still incredibly mysterious.
It's like the taming the strangeness of it. Like it's very practical. One of the things that surprised me, like, because you'd think of a modern Castaway story as being quite psychological, but it's very, how do I build a house? How do I build a knife? How do I make life livable?
Yeah, especially because like that kind of introspection in like novels and it just happens in fiction just happens so much later. What I don't think a lot of people necessarily think about, or what we now take for granted, is that we tend to take reading as like a solitary activity, but like you and the book. But what's always really important to consider, and I think it changes how you understand sort of the path that the novel takes, is that like reading was more of a sort of communal activity because literary rates were a lot lower and because books are so unbelievably expensive. It's more that somebody would borrow a book or they would have a book and they would read it with their household. So it kind of makes sense that you have this like focus on slightly more like adventure novels or more, as you'll see later in my list, like more moralizing novels, a little bit more of like a sermon kind of thing. That's why you get, especially in France, you get like abbots who write a communal activity rather than like the solitary activity becomes later. I'm sure this has been written on, but like my hot take, should we say, is that as reading becomes more of like an individual activity, that's when like the novel decides to become more of like, not decides, it becomes more an introspective way of writing.
more
Yeah, exactly.
individualistic, that reflects the way that it's being read. And I suppose with Robinson Crusoe, it's kind of like a really eccentric, raggedy guy shows up in your village and tells you a story about his travels. It's kind of the experience you can kind of replicate by reading it aloud in a communal setting.
Yeah, I wonder what the worst novel to read aloud is. Because when you hit the 20th century, some of those really don't want to be taken off the page. Especially as they become more annotated, more footnoted, and more sort of like visually arranged. Don't even bother trying. Yeah, I just wonder when it happened that the first novel that was released and you just thought, don't read this one to your friends. You have to look at it. It's on the page. It doesn't exist in the voice, in the air. It exists exclusively in this artifact, and you have to study it in your internal monologue rather than even attempting to vocalize.
I mean, there are definitely like after the Renaissance, you get these things called whore dialogues, which are like almost like kind of plays that are meant to be explaining how certain things happen. And you might have to, are you going to edit? How much editing do you do after you record these? Because you might have to blur certain things. So it's literally just like a play dialogue, and I'm gonna throw that over there. How like explain how certain things happen. So plays are definitely, I think, meant to be read by yourself, I guess, but completely different structurally to the kind of stuff that happens to prose. But it's definitely interesting seeing like how these things like move and change, especially when you look at stuff like is more explicit, so it's not necessarily meant to be like read for the like family fun for all involved.
Great, let's move on to the 1720s.
So this is my other double entry of Daniel Defoe, with one of my favorite novels. One of my favorite novels of all time is Roxana or The Fortunate Mistress, and this is a novel about it's set during era of Charles II, I think it is, and it's about a woman who is very socially ambitious, and what she does is then through like various different lovers, she acquires wealth, she acquires assets, and especially like social ties and social status. So, and she does that through being a courtesan and using her like womanly charms, and very, very specifically sort of taking all of like Daniel Defoe's like cheek and his like love of satire, in how he approaches like this idea of like the marriage market and how like women acquire especially like power and assets and finances. And so it's how she like navigates that by also then like never ever becoming a wife. And one of the interesting things in here is how she very much is aware that if she were to ever become anybody's wife, she loses all of her power. She's very aware that like all of her assets become his, but she like suddenly loses all of like her autonomy just because she gets married. So she kind of understands that like a wife is like an upper servant is what she says, and that if she stays a mistress to these like various like wealthy men, she basically gets to have all of their money and her money. It also sits in this like again like fun like moralizing sort of space of like Defoe's writing this being like, yes, this is really fun, and then on the last page he's like, oh, but by the way, you shouldn't do this because lots of bad things happen to her in the end. I'm like, okay, I love this is such like a footnote on the last page of your like what 200-page novel. You're like, by the way, don't do this though. I'm like, yeah, I really convincing argument.
Hearing your description of Roxana, I thought of Anna Delvey. If you were following the tale of the fake socialite who basically tricked all of New York high society, a woman I really admire quite a lot for what she pulled off there.
Like getting convicted of the grand larceny is excellent.
Yeah, like, it's the right way to go. It's not like that's the best crime, grand larceny.
And reputation. It's really a beautiful sort of like, this is what it is. And Roxana sort of pulls off the same thing by proving that it isn't actually who you are. It's who you seem to be. And then you've lived your life. It doesn't matter like what happens at the end, you're a little moral coda. You have already successfully done everything. I'm sure there's Anna Delveys in the world who haven't been caught, who are still doing it, will do it their whole lives, will die. And they just pretended to be very impressive high society women and succeeded.
She's like the definition of fake it till you make it. I tried at one point to figure out how much money she had by the end of the book by using like gold and inflation rates. And I mean, the number that I got was that like she had acquired like 32 million pounds of today's money by the end of the novel. I was like, honestly, fair. Like, do you do lots of terrible things? Yeah, but also like, I mean,
32 million quid
for like you as a woman in the 17th century. I'm like, fair enough.
That sounds good. It sounds very French.
It does sound, it feels very French. It may as well be French. A lot of these novels are French because they kind of do follow similar like themes.
Yeah, cool. Let's move on to the 1730s then.
1730s we have.
Quick interruption, Milo and I are also over on Patreon. We're very grateful for all the support we get over there. If you do support us, you gain access to some extra material, an extra sort of 20 minutes of chat with Emma, for instance, as well as Zoom meetings with us. We're also thinking of starting a book club, so having a set text that we speak about every quarter, so every 3 months, and we talk about in depth. If you want to be part of deciding the first book, you come over now and support us. Yeah, as we said, enormously grateful. Thanks so much for your support. Back to Emma.
Manon, Lescaut by the Abbé Prévost. So this is what I mean in terms of like the moralizing things that you have Abbott's writing. And it's set in the early 18th century. It is set in Paris, of course, because it's France. And if it's not set in Paris, it's obviously set nowhere. But also in like Louisiana in, well, what would this be? 18th century Louisiana is...
France. Let's just
yeah,
call it
it's France, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, but it's like one of love and passion and so much about like moral corruption, and there's a lot of like gambling and a lot of like passion that happens outside of wedlock and lots of promises that get made. A young nobleman like abandons his future plans to run off with Manon Lescaut because she's so beautiful, and she also just likes luxury things. So he also, you know, spends a lot of money on her, and then it becomes a very like tragic and just ill-fated cycle of betrayal and just this downward like spiral of morally bad things. But what it also is then also like quite a fun book. So much about, you know, corruption and social climbing and also fate. And this is also a ballet that I've seen, and I really, really recommend the ballet.
Have you? There's 2 operas as well, I think, aren't there? There's like a
Is there as well?
There's a Puccini one, and then there's a really great one by Massenet called Manon.
There's a film as well.
Massenet opera is
Same
so
deal.
good, so good. The Beverly Sills recording of that opera, mwah! Oh, if you're into French opera.
And it's also such like a quick read. And again, highlighted and highlighter. This is like a really easy one and quite a fun one to like get your teeth into if you want to like understand 18th century France more, and also just this era and like especially how they treat women and how they treat women who are ambitious, should we say.
Where does this social climbing thing come from in the French novel? It just seems to be a standard pat thing that every French novel I read is about sort of social class climbing, deceit.
It's about like how they like use passion and attraction and all those kind of things and how they exploit that. Like one of the things that I was trying to shoehorn into my list, but it became too long, was like Bel Ami, and like that's Guy de Maupassant, and that's just, he's also social climbing, but with all the like women that he knows. And the film adaptation with Robert Pattinson is such a fave, and I still like really highly rate that. He's such good casting for that. But yeah, it's a lot of the French stuff does sort of seem to talk about that a lot, and I think maybe it's because, well, they had very different moral values, should we say, to the English, or more that the English were better at hiding it. I think the English were probably a bit better at hiding their bad behavior,
repressing it, waiting for it to explode.
Yeah, that's the English way. But I think the French seem very self-aware of it. It's as though they've, and we were speaking about this in our last one, they perfected the system and so become very interested in analyzing the system and how it works. Whereas I don't think you could say that the English did perfect the system. I have no idea what the Germans were even thinking about the system. But the French, they had reached this utter sophistication in the social system and in the social hierarchy, and so became very curious about, how is it built? How do we undermine it? How does it assert itself with our various other values? But I mean, I suppose we're seeing that expressed somewhat in their proclivities, their fictional proclivities.
Mm-hmm. But I think it also makes sense then if the French are so like out and open about these kind of things, especially with what the aristocracy is doing and how they are spending money and how they are living their lives to very different social moral standards than to the rest of society. Then you can kind of see where a lot of this like sort of builds towards the French Revolution, and then like having multiple different republics. Like you can sort of see the groundwork almost like kind of really early on.
You said this one was also like it's written by an abbot. Is it like more
Yes.
consistently moralizing than the way Defoe does it?
Looking at it from a modern perspective, we have such different like moral values that for me, I'm reading this going like, wee, this is so much fun. Instead of going like, oh, I'm gonna, I need to not do this or I'll go to hell. It's such like a different viewpoint that I almost have no idea how like a contemporary reader would experience this novel. Like I read it and I was like, wow, what a good time. Maybe wouldn't make the same mistakes that she did, but also like that was fun rather than like reading it and going, oh my God, if I do any of this, I'm going straight to hell and I'm like going to burn there forever.
Should we move on to the 1740s then?
We shall, because in terms of like, it was like a really strong theme running through all these books. Back to like moralizing, because this is Samuel Richardson, Pamela, or what is it? Virtue Rewarded.
Virtue Rewarded, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is very much what happens when you're not virtuous, and this is virtue rewarded. But then also, this is not virtue reward. This is,
That's not
Yeah.
virtue rewarded.
yeah.
Yeah.
But then,
There's
like,
four
until right at the end.
possibilities. Not virtue rewarded, virtue unrewarded, virtue rewarded.
Surely we'll get some virtue unrewarded at some
Yeah.
point.
Actually, we do,
That's-
yeah. But this is such an important one for like how the novel changes in like 18th century England. You have this like sort of slow build up in the 1700s, 1710s. But then from like 1720s, 30s and 40s, like you get this explosion of things being written. You get, Joseph Andrews, and then
Fielding, Henry
yeah,
Fielding, yeah.
Shamala, which is,
Who wrote
the
the
parody
parody,
of
yeah.
of this. And it's about a servant who, through being very virtuous and staying on the moral path that she's supposed to, is rewarded with like great social things, like I believe getting to become a wife, because that is everyone's favorite reward, isn't it, to being a virtuous woman, is now you get to be married. But yeah, it's 18th century England. A lot about upper class, a lot about, estates and an emerging bourgeois society. And then again, it's about like class mobility, but then so differently portrayed than in this. And in this, so you can kind of almost read it as like something that has to be written in reaction to those things. And then in reaction to that, you get Shamala, which is somewhere in the depths of here, but I like wave this at you instead. The main sort of theme of this is the young servant Pamela who resists the advances of her employer.
Yeah, is it a bit like Milton's Comus? Which is, I recall, being this kind of same premise: woman lost in the woods resists with her infinite chastity various attempts by like a satyr or some strange being. The structure, as it were, of a woman resisting successfully, and that being sort of the greatest virtue.
And then Fielding's parody is just to gender swap it. It's a man resisting countless women throwing themselves at him, which just suddenly becomes funny for some reason. In various inns, he's just going all over the country trying to avoid the beautiful women throwing themselves at him, and he can't.
It's just what a hard life. Like, what a terrible fate for a character. It's just so difficult.
Pamela, it's a long time since I read it. I remember it being very claustrophobic, actually. It gets like, it has a certain kind of being locked in a haunted castle Bluebeard element to it.
It feels very
attack
stressful
mode.
reading it as a woman. You're just like, where is the HR? Like, please, like, help. But also the idea that, like, so this was such a reality for so many, like, girls. And the fact that, if she would have, fallen for his charms or whatever and repeat advances or what threats to like lose her job and whatever, it would have ruined her life. And she, this happened to so many servant girls. And so, yeah,
But
it's just
still, like outside the West, Egypt or Morocco or Saudi or that standard is still there. That's still the expectation of infinite resistance. Let's move on to 1750s then.
we shall with Charlotte Lennox, the female Quixote, not Quixote, female Quixote, which is like the 18th century way of saying it. And so it is a retelling-ish of Don Quixote. It's a woman who, her mother dies when she's young, and so she lives with her father on his estate, and they have a massive library. They have a huge, huge, huge library. And so what she does is growing up, she spends her time reading. I don't know if you've come across these. They're called these like roman fleuve, which are like these novels that just go on and on and on and on and on and on and
A
on.
bit like the soap opera equivalent.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
but they're like meant to be romances, I think. And so that was apparently what her mother read. So she reads loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of these. And I think they're meant to be like 17th century. I've tried to like track these kind of bad boys down, and I haven't. They're really difficult to find, which I can imagine if they're just so long and maybe like a bit crap, but they're really, really difficult to like look for. And so this woman spends her time this girl, she like reads all of these like novels about like courtly romances and like chivalry and stuff. And then she becomes of age and needs to be introduced to society. But because she's been so insular, and like basically don't even expose to like these books, her household and her father, when she's like introduced to society, she has some like odd behaviors that she's picked up from like reading all of these books. So it's quite like a funny and satirical one about somebody who is per definition really delusional, and just like not well adjusted to a contemporary society, and like through that makes like a bunch of like blunders and gaffes because she doesn't know how she's supposed to conduct herself. But then it's somebody who's also like very like pure of heart and sweet, and so it's like actually like one of my, I think this is one of my favorite novels, and I don't talk about it anywhere near enough because it's so different from like what a lot of the 18th century writes about. And I think it's just honestly really a very like sweet novel. And I think I never see it on like lists of classics. I think this was a like intensely fun novel, and it's one that I've like excessively annotated. It's one of my heavier ones because it just there's so much good stuff in here. Like you just can't, because it also like very explicitly talks about like the marriage market, and it talks very explicitly about what it is to like basically like be a teenage girl in this society. And so yeah, I think it's really sweet, and like it's a lot about like sentimentality and a lot about romance, and is by like being like a satire of these like romance novels. And it's again kind of meant to be like a moral warning of like, ladies, don't read all these romance books because you'll be like utterly delusional, which just like feels particularly topical considering like how much a lot of like women at the moment, like myself included, have gone like straight back into reading lots of ridiculous romances, and a lot about the comedy that happens of when you really believe that you are like the main character. So I think it's quite a special one on this list because I don't think I've really read much like it, but definitely really, really underrated.
Yeah, I love the premise, and it works just as well in Don Quixote in that you have this figure who is sort of ludicrous, sort of a parody, but by the end, you're so attached to the
Yeah.
beauty of this man's mind,
And
which is
ultimately,
integrated
it
all of this
feels
kind of dreaming and living
yeah.
it.
And it's quite a good argument for delusion because, at least in the Cervantes one, he's just the most sympathetic and noble and good person in the whole sort of insanely corrupt Spain that is portrayed in that book because he's deluded. The delusion has a certain romantic nobility to it. Eventually, I like that switch, and ultimately, I think a lot of the time with a romance novel, with any kind of novel that's like aiming for something higher than real life, I think that higher thing does exist in a kind of conceptual, platonic plane. You won't find it in the real world. You'll be disappointed in the real world, but I do think it's talking about something, an inherent hole in the human heart that is actually there. And ultimately, it's great with this sort of story that subjectivity, what other people are thinking, what other people are feeling, does remain a mystery for us in all situations, at all times, even when we're 99.99% sure. There's something that remains slightly unknowable about other people. And through like reading loads of books, you do have this experience of like overwhelming subjectivity. You really feel what it's like to be another person, and in some ways that can feel more intimate than conversations, relationships in real life. Yeah, should we move on to the 1760s, if I'm counting correctly?
We shall, but I had
Yeah,
one
1760s.
sneaky addition that I quickly just
Please.
wanted to for the
Yeah, please
1750s,
do.
which is of course a little cheeky bit of Voltaire because he deserves to be on it, but I could also talk about this for a million years. I wasn't going to bump Charlotte Lennox for Voltaire, shockingly. So Candide or Optimism, which is just honestly, a silly little novel about a silly little guy who like goes on an adventure, and it's very like Forrest Gump. History intersects him at like every point, and it all goes like horribly fucking wrong. I recommend this a lot to people who are trying to get into classics. It's like 100 pages. I'm dyslexic. I read this in a day, so I really recommend this one.
Another great delusion novel. A lot of delusion in the air in
Yes,
the
absolutely.
1750s, yeah.
So weirdly, the like 1760s was quite difficult to find a good one for that I had read. So if you will forgive me, I have two quick recommendations because, yes, like I said, I have not read them, but the ones that I would read, which I own because I own far too many books, we have The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, and then I also have Lawrence Stern's A Sentimental Journey. Lawrence Stern being the guy who writes
Tristram Shandy.
Yes, exactly. And then Horace Walpole being
Yeah, but I'd like to go to the house. It's one of the most absurd looking buildings I've ever encountered images of.
it's like it's a little castle. It's so fun. It's like somebody who clearly like had an idea, wanted to like run with it, and was like, here is some like fun gothic stuff. It kind of feels a little bit like a Disney build.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's like it's quite fantastical in quite like a fun way of just like, oh, you have money, you kind of can do whatever you want. Like, yeah, just like build yourself a fun little gothic house. Why not? And so of course I choose Castle of Otranto because of it being like one of the like very earliest gothic works. The gothic and the romantic is creeping up on us.
Sentimental Journey is also a lot of fun.
He dies, doesn't he, before he finishes it.
Well, it has one of the great unintentional, like unfinished endings ever. It's like an anecdote where he's like sleeping in the same room as a woman, and it's completely dark, and he wants to reach out to like put out the taper and accidentally grabs her boob, but the novel and it leads you to know this situation's going to happen, and it's like, and I reached out and grabbed her dash, and that's the last line of prose Lawrence Stern ever wrote before dying.
So good though.
Yeah.
This one is also fun in terms of that like 18th century thing of like doing these like grand journeys and like grand tours. Like a friend of mine and I, we agreed that when we turn 60, we're going to go on a grand tour of our own, but then only staying in fancy hotels and having somebody chauffeur us around and taking like nice trains or something. And like, you know, having a look at lots of stuff that the British Museum, I'm sure, would love to have in their collection.
And nick it.
Bring it back.
Yeah, bring it back. That's what souvenirs are for, right?
There's also lots of funny like practical stuff in the Stern about like he's really annoyed at tax. There's a whole, you know, like cottage industry of people ranting about the French tax customs guys.
So funny.
You know, completely pointless details to us now, but it's good. That's what you live for.
It's like, I feel like the pointless details are the ones that you're like, oh, this was like a whole like real world. Like these were the things that like bothered you and annoyed you. And it's like, okay, sure, this is the kind of stuff that will eventually need a footnote, but also like give me the flavor of what existing in your time period was like please. Like I find that so fun. And also in terms of you know, moralizing discussions and clerical priests writing stuff, Stern is he's a member of the clergy. I can't remember what he was.
He was an Anglican vicar in Coxwold and the sort of edge of the North York moors. Yeah, let's move on to the 1770s.
We have, of course, going a bit further into the Romantics, capital R. We, of course, have Werther, The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe. This is, again, one that I often recommend to people who, if they're trying to get into reading classics and they especially want to read something about the Romantics, and I personally tend to recommend like the European Romantics. I find them personally more interesting than English Romantics. It always reminds me of that like one quote from, is it from Outnumbered? When it's something like the Romantics were like a bunch of,
I think they were a bunch of emos, might be.
Yeah, I think, it must be that. Goethe is a good example of what ends up being called like copycat suicide. It's about somebody who becomes very obsessed with this woman and how he must have her, but he can't have her because I think she's marrying someone else. And then about how he becomes more and more emotionally distraught by this. And then the solution to his pain then does become to take his own life, which he like only sort of half succeeds in. It's definitely a book to read with that in mind, but it really might not be for everybody. It comes almost with like teenage high drama of being so like emotionally invested in somebody that you cannot have, that it sort of takes over your entire mental well-being. When I read it when I was like, I don't know, maybe what was it, like 21, it felt more reasonable. And now as an adult, I'm like, oh my God, please develop your brain fully. But yeah, I think it's definitely one to look out for, like how like just emotionally volatile I think sometimes the romantics can be a bit, with like all of these like very big feelings and trying to understand a lot of like very big emotions. It's
Yeah.
a short one, but like quite a strange one, and it kind of feels quite modern in the late 18th century in Germany, or whatever Germany is at this point.
Yeah.
No one knows even now.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it's I'm always like the German lands, I think.
Don't look at that map. Don't look at the map
yeah.
of Germany when Goethe's
But it's like an almost inversion also of Pamela in these earlier books you were talking about. This is like the obsessed man's point of view, and perhaps he's less of a badger than Pamela's, I guess, husband
Yeah, like less
ultimately.
less of a
But
sex
yeah,
pest.
it's just yeah, but seeing into the obsessed brain and what
Hmm.
causes anyone to be so persistent, or at least mentally persistent, even if not physically persistent, like that feedback loop of emotion, which maybe the Romantics were better set to depict than the earlier 18th century. Maybe they kind of
Hmm.
picked up the sort of stylistic tools to not merely depict the exterior action of resistance or pursuing or whatever, but to actually get into the brain of it. What is the mental drama, rather than exclusively, who's in what room and saying what to whom kind of thing.
Let's move on to the 1780s.
So one that I always forget that is actually this late is Dangerous Liaisons. I always think that this is a earlier novel, but it's not. It's because I think it's like set like a couple decades earlier. This is from 1782. So yes, pre-revolutionary France, aristocrats. And of course, every French person's favorite thing, clearly, seduction, manipulation, lots about power. It is essentially, well, it's an epistolary novel, which is what makes it really, really fun in terms of like feeling like you're getting all of the goss. And it is about two former lovers who decide to essentially kind of compete, but they're essentially trying to like ruin each other's lives by ruining someone else's life. It's a woman who's, this is where it gets complicated and there's a lot of goss involved, but it's somebody is offended by her former lover and now wishes to punish him by using someone else to seduce his prospective wife. I think is probably the best way of summarizing it. And it's just about all of the like seductive shenanigans involved and about how they're just terrible, terrible people. But then also it's like it's like the goss and the drama. Like tell me more about the terrible things that you're doing. Yeah, and it's also just a lot about like libertinism and about excess, and as well about like kind of again a criticism of the aristocracy, but then also like it does this thing where it's like so fun. But I'm like, I know you're supposed to be criticizing it, and I know I'm supposed to go, oh, these people are terrible. But it's kind of a feeling of like, oh, these people are terrible. Like, tell me more what happens next. Please, like, tell me everything. Yeah, so kind of an exposition of elite society and like when the rules no longer like apply to you, how you choose then to behave, which is, I guess, like a big one of like just libertinism in general.
And a great title, one of the best titles in the list so
Yeah,
far. I remember
absolutely.
even, yeah, as a child, just having seen maybe the film poster or something, and it was like, yeah, what the hell is that? I didn't really know what Liasons meant. Not a particularly insightful comment, but I do love that title. I think it's doing a lot of legwork for me.
But like even as a movie, it's like the adaptation with Glenn Close, John
John
Malkovich, and
Malkovich.
Michelle Pfeiffer. What a film!
Yeah,
There is
it's
one with
so
Colin
good.
Firth,
Yeah,
but it's
amen.
nowhere near as good.
My only criticism of the film is that it's not like 7 hours long. I'd love like a full TV series
It's a
length of.
masterpiece. It's
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah, everybody's so good in it. Like all the performances, Close and Malkovich in the main role. Even like hilarious Keanu Reeves doing all his crazy
Yes.
accent
Oh my
stuff is
God. I like
fun.
forget
Yeah.
he's in there.
Yeah,
Um,
extremely beautiful Uma Thurman. Oh, what a film. What good times had by all.
I agree with you. That is like such a well cast film, and I think all the like in the beginning, especially all the character introductions, especially to like John Malkovich's character as Valmont, is just perfect. I'm like, wow, I can like tell how much of an asshole you are, and this is gonna be like such a fun ride. Also, all Cruel Intentions, I realized later is based on
Mm.
that, and that as well is like what a brilliant adaptation. I really, really, really rate that one too. So yeah, it's one of just, critiquing the elite and how terrible they can be, but also like, you want to gossip? Like, of course I want to gossip. Like
And
that's
there is a sadistic joy in watching someone trying to ruin someone else's life. It's fun to watch, especially someone of high status, crash and burn and being part of it, because it feels like you're being invited into a conspiracy. But on both sides as well. You've got that Death Note fun of watching them try to outwit each other, on top of the fun of watching two elites crash and burn in the intro.
That delight of like mutually assured destruction. I'm like, okay, I don't even have to pick. Like, I don't want to pick who I want to root for because you're both terrible. But also, like, can this happen to both of you? Can like both of you go down at the same time? Awesome.
But it's a great effect to achieve that, to have two competing characters without accidentally or intentionally giving sympathy to one of them, to actually achieve the equality of either equally horrible but equally impressive at the same time. Because if they're equally horrible but one of them's just a bit smarter, you end up kind of siding with them, or if one of them has certain flaws that are endearing. But to have it that you have two unlikable people who are fascinating because of their talents at being unlikable, and to not ever fall into it and think, oh, in the end, I guess it should be you because of X, Y, and Z. And we get back into, the abbots writing their moral tales, who presumably could get all the way to the end, but then would have to give it a little turn and say, but as we've seen, he was the more noble man because he saved the drowning baby. So we'll give it to him. But to not try that and to just like sink into hell together is a really, it's a bold move, but it's really impressive to pull it off.
But I think also what's like extra impressive is like, not making you like prefer one character by making them like good or anything, but then also not compromising the complexity of a character. Like making like, they're like terrible and they're evil, making sure that you don't like prefer one by making them a little like endearing you to them a bit, but then like retaining that like complexity of why they behave the way that they do, and you can understand that, but you don't empathize with that. I think that is also almost like the step above it that I think makes it really, really, really impressive. A quick deviation, but you said in terms of like, the all of the like priests and the abbots who write stuff having to put their little disclaimer. My theory for why Defoe does it at the end of Roxana on the last page is just because I don't think he wanted to go back to prison. Like, I think he was like, please don't put me back in jail, because he's in and out of debtor's jail. I think he dies in debtor's jail. So I think he's like, please, no more. His grave is actually somewhere in like Islington, in London, and I've always like meant to just bring him a bottle of wine, because I feel like he'd enjoy that. But I think Dangerous Liaisons is one that's it's one that I need everyone to read, but also I think it's a surprisingly accessible text, especially in an English translation, and it's just one that I think I'd find it difficult for somebody not to enjoy it. I mean, I know that I have more like gossipy things, I think, in everything that I read, regardless of where in history it is, but it's definitely one where I'm like, I promise you, classics is so fun. And Dangerous Liaisons, I think, is such a really, really good example of that.
Yeah, and I suppose another thing about making both people not morally virtuous, you don't need to put that disclaimer in there, because it's just embedded into the text already. It's like, there's no good guy who you need to make win, in spite of you sort of rooting for the evil person.
But it's this kind of idea of like suspending your disbelief, and like when you're engaging in like with a film or you're engaging with the novel, you're like, I'm agreeing to suspend my, I'm gonna ignore the fact that I'm looking at squiggles on a page and hallucinating. And so when you get those like kind of like crammed in endings, it's like, oh, the real world is intruding here. Like it feels so weird in a way, because you're like, oh, the outside world, like outside of this little agreement between like me and the text, or me and the film, is like here. Like everything else that I've been trying to like look away from or understand in like a little vacuum or whatever to try and process it, is now it's here. It feels so it basically just feels like an intrusion, because it is, which is like kind of what makes it feel so like, ugh, like why is this here?
Before this video goes to infinite lengths, let's go to 1790.
So 1791, we have the Marquis de Sade with Justine, or The Misfortunes of Virtue. So we've really had like the full matrix. And if I wanted to add another one, I could add, he also just, there's a character in here that has her own novel, which is actually like 1,000 pages, which you can then imagine does not get printed very often with Sade. Juliet, or Vice amply rewarded. Love his choice for amply rewarded there as well. Just like really like hammering that home, being like, she's shit, but like she does, like she gets all the good stuff. Poor Justine, however, does everything that she is supposed to, like our dear darling Pamela, but he's very much making the point of like, look, Justine does everything that Pamela is supposed to be doing, and it ends horribly for her. This is a book that I wouldn't say that I ever technically recommend. I would just say that it exists, and if you want to read somebody who has very extreme viewpoints that are very different from your own, you can look at Sade. Sade often, of course, being the namesake for the word sadism. So, you know, but it's pre-revolutionary France, and it is about a girl who leaves a convent and then all of the like things that befall her. It's a lot about hypocrisy. It's a lot about virtue and suffering. It is very much like continuously questioning God, being like, well, okay, if virtue is supposed to be this thing that we all aim for, and it's this thing that like will keep me morally safe from hell or whatever, then why do all these horrible things keep happening to me over and over again? And she's so like heavily contrasted against Juliet, who does terrible things, but then also good things happen to her. So she doesn't suffer in the same way. So it's one that is very much about like the extremes of human cruelty, and then also about how like religion and God, and then like what is the point of like this and like this kind of morality if terrible things still happen. And so it's one that, because Sade takes such an extreme viewpoint, that he's very interesting to read, but he's not for the faint of heart. He is not for like the weak of stomach, I would say. Like there is some like really gross stuff in here that I read and I can't unsee it. So I will absolutely warn like that is a thing with him. But reading Sade is super weird, because you'll be reading something that he's written. He wrote this while he was imprisoned in the Bastille. But he's so weird because you'll read something that he writes and you'll be like, ew, 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 like this is weird. And then you'll stumble up like onto something that's like, oh, and like, you know, when it comes to women's bodies and abortion and like having like terminating pregnancies, like she can do whatever she wants with her own body, and like the government and God have no place in deciding like any of the decisions about this. And it's so, which is from, I think, Philosophy in the Bedroom. So it's just he's just such a strange person to read for that person.
Maybe that in the 18th century also was in the you category. And there's an alternate universe where that remains you, but all the weird foot stuff it just is mainstream.
It's a really strange one of just like, because his views are so extreme, that some of the stuff that he writes now in a modern context is really progressive. So it's like he's just like really weird and fascinating to read because of that.
It's impressive that it's still kind of gross and weird after a few hundred years, because we think of like, especially by the time you're in like on the edge of the 19th century, nothing can really shock us anymore, you know.
Oh no, it's with this, or I can't remember if it's with Juliet, like some of the stuff that he writes about like sexual acts involving multiple people, there are etchings that go along with some of his novels, because it makes no sense reading it where people are. Like it's like I've read some romance novels. I'm still reading this like, who is where and is that a limb or what is, I don't know what's going on anymore. Yeah, I'm just like, you're stood where?
Yeah, you gotta get
how?
Consult the
graph. Get the topographers in to kind of
genuinely. I think one of my editions of Juliet has like those etchings in them, because you read it and you're like, oh, and then you're like, oh, well, some of the romance books, like contemporary romance books I've read, could probably have done with this, because that also made no sense. It's nice to know that's like an ongoing problem.
But I think it's the best in the square of like virtue rewarded, unrewarded, vice rewarded, unrewarded.
I'm gonna have to make a little metrics now.
It's kind of it's like the Book of Job thing, which also has a maybe slightly unconvincing ending tagged on the end. But you're the best guy ever. Let's ruin your life completely.
The way this ends, by the way, is absolutely insane. If nobody wants spoilers, I would say mute this for a second.
But for 30 seconds, yeah.
But she gets struck by lightning. I forgot about that until right now. She gets fucking struck by lightning. It's God being
after
like,
doing a profoundly virtuous act.
Yeah, it's like you've suffered so deeply and you've been abused so much, and now I'm just gonna strike you down. I don't think that's like genuinely still one of the like, wildest endings I think I've ever read of anything. I was reading it like, what the fuck? No redemption.
That is how Job should end, to be fair. If the Book of Job ended with Job being struck by lightning and dying, I think the exegesis on that would be fat. Instead, like, here's a new wife and children reborn. Bit weird. Not too sure what's going on there. Are they new versions or the same? But he was just blasted into smithereens. All right, moving on. That's
I didn't know you could end a novel this way. Fair.
Yeah, I mean, now everybody's doing it. Are we 1800 now? Have we reached the 19th century?
Oh, we've
Wow.
got to 1807 with Corinne or Italy. This was one of these novels that I'd never, by Madame de Staël, Staël, one that I discovered through my degree. Big fan of comparative literature. If anybody's thinking about what they want to do, if they haven't chosen their degree yet, English lit is fine, but comparative lit means you can do absolutely everything. And this was one that
These
I
are
was
wise
introduced
words, just by the
Mm.
way. These are, yeah, listen to what she's saying. Yeah.
Somebody ran into me recently in a restaurant and they were like, "Oh, I did an MA in comparative literature because of like you and your videos." And the only thing I didn't say it, but the only thing I could think was, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." But then also hopefully they've read lots of like fun stuff. So,
All the Yiddish poets, they're on it.
so this is set in the early 19th century. And again, it's more of like a grand tour kind of situation. We're in Italy. We've been a lot in France and England, and now we're finally in Italy. This is, Napoleonic Europe, lots about art, lots about just intelligence, and also just like women being very cultured and very interesting, and that's always like fun. And all of these novels basically do feature just like, I think what I enjoy is obviously just like interesting women and complicated women, and a lot of these novels as well being written by women. I say a lot. The only one I've got at the beginning is Charlotte Lennox. But yeah, I think is this one that I really rate in terms of like sort of experiencing very early 19th century Europe, because she writes in such a way that is, again, quite like fun and gossipy, but also like more like literary, intellectual kind of way. And then she talks a lot about culture, and there's just something so just enjoyable to read. And I think she renders certain places so vividly that you really feel that you're standing there. But yeah, it's very much one about like art and like poetry and love, and also just creativity, but also like freedom, and then also looking at what society demands of you as a woman. I really enjoyed it. And also because like Madame de Staël like
We'll
spends
go with
time
style.
beefing with
We'll go with
yeah.
style, yeah.
She just, spends her time beefing with Napoleon, and he doesn't like her. So I'm like, I like love that for you.
Byron described her as the most interesting person in the universe.
And to come from him is like,
Yeah, I know. It's like she's one of these people who had this really extraordinary effect on kind of everyone who met her. And you get the impression, kind of like an Oscar Wilde figure, where the actual perfect artwork was her own person. And the works are just sort of incidental outpourings of it. Milo and I recently read a novel that's sort of a sort of fantasized version of her life, but where she takes an immortality potion and lives between the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution. Again, a Forrest Gump kind of thing, where she's just bumping into the famous people of all the time periods, by a guy called Vladimir Sharov. The novel's called Before and During.
I think that sounds really fun. I'm gonna add that one to my list.
Yeah, please do. It will give you extremely weird feelings about Staël forever. And indeed, all of the subjects it touches, you start reading it, and it does seem like a fairly conventional novel. And it's always written like a conventional novel. But about 100 pages in, you were reading some of the strangest and most unusual sentiments that have ever been thought by anyone, making perfect sense. But my God.
I love that people are still managing to strive for like original thought. Somebody asked me recently, being like, "Do you think you've ever actually like had an original?" Not in like a mean way, but like, do you ever worry that you've never like had an actually original thought? And I'm like, the stuff that like goes on in my brain, like original sentence was what he meant. And I was like,
yes.
I absolutely believe I've had original sentences come out of my brain. Absolutely.
I think constantly. I don't know. Maybe I'm underestimating the amount of sentences going on at any given time.
In China, in particular, they're saying all the sentences. They have factories where they just say every possible sentence to undermine the West.
But even like in a rise of like LLMs and stuff, I'm like, I definitely have still thought sentences in my brain that no machine could possibly have conceived of. I'm going to give myself that credit.
If you actually think a sentence, it's different from all the words appearing in that order. So the sentence with the, I ate the left shin of a deer which transformed into me. Like, that's rare enough as a kind of sentiment, but and an LLM might have put those words in that order, but I've actually thought it, which I'm pretty sure is a different thing. As he was saying, the hallucination that happens because of the squiggles is the thing we're talking about. We're not talking about the actual squiggles themselves. Those are just squiggles. They remain just kind of useful bridges.
Oh, thank God they just remain squiggles, right?
Yeah, they're squiggles to the magic world on the other side of the bridge. I like the idea that this is just what everyone talks about in your office. Do you think you've thought an original? Great. Let's move to 1810s.
Yes. So with the 1810s, this is Austen territory. And I don't think I'm mature enough for Austen, personally. And what's she cranking out at this point? So what? Sense and Sensibility in 1811, 1813, Pride and Prejudice, 1814, Mansfield Park, 1815, Emma. That's a pretty solid run. Especially because she, it's good that she banged all of those out because she didn't live much longer.
In a 4-year span, that is mad. Yeah.
She doesn't finish Northanger Abbey and
Persuasion.
They're both posthumously published, aren't they? And I would give those as options, but I have yet to read an Austen that I actually enjoy, so I'm saving the others.
Whoa!
I know, this is my controversial opinion.
Austen sucks.
Austen sucks. Read Dangerous Liasons instead.
So I'm actually going to have to go with what you've both already said, which is of course Frankenstein, 1818. You can't go wrong. I really enjoyed it. I like looking at it so much as kind of what a treatise on motherhood and creation and play, the idea that men are playing God where women just create life because we can. And I think there's something so interesting about that kind of idea. Of course, sci-fi's OG Mary Shelley. It would be rude, honestly, to choose anything else, even if Austen's cranking out crazy hits at this point.
Great, an intertextual one as well, because Frankenstein learns to read or learns to speak German by reading The Sorrows of Young Werther, which is why he becomes a big emo monster. I think that's
which is why
term.
That's when the Jacob Elordi casting works a little bit there. Then I think personally.
Yeah, no, true, yeah.
And it's the Don Quixote thing of a guy who reads Paradise Lost and Young Werther and decides he has to become an emo fallen angel, obsessive beast. It's the only possible option. That input requires that output. They should have given him. What should they have given him? What's an alternate Frankenstein reading list for the monster that would have made him a fine country gentleman? Maybe Pamela. Give him Pamela.
Yeah, maybe just something a bit funny, a bit of satire, to give him a bit of Voltaire. Let's see what he does with that.
Voltaire, Jonathan Swift to be
becomes a really annoying, witty man. The monster coming in.
Shit, he's a man of letters. What have we done?
Oh no, we have to be polite to him because his manners are so immaculate.
He's so refined. Fuck, what do we do?
Yeah, but he subtly belittles us. Climbing in over the fence. Yeah, and just becoming a different kind of misanthrope. There's the romantic misanthrope who's weeping and full of the hormones, and then there is the Voltaire Jonathan Swift misanthrope who's just smiling the entire time, big grin on his face, but a real very negative opinion of humankind. Yeah, I love that, as you were saying, that the motherhood, fatherhood stuff you can drag out of Frankenstein, but it's just amazing for dragging stuff out of it. That's what I love about it.
Yeah.
You can talk exclusively about Frankenstein and science. You can talk exclusively about Frankenstein and organized religion. There's just so many interesting ways of mapping things onto Frankenstein or extracting things from it. It works as a great modern myth in that kind of way.
Yes, absolutely. That's such a good way of phrasing it, actually.
And the messiness helps because I think you can get into the the prose style and the structure especially is a bit insane, particularly the
Yeah.
section
Oh,
when
yeah.
Frankenstein's doing his tour of England very slowly. Just-
Like when I was reading it and I was like, the point, like the POV swap, I was like, what the fuck? What do you mean we get his point of view? Of all the things that I thought were going to happen, that was not one of them. I was like, because
Yeah,
when I saw
and
the
I
film
love
with my
that
friend, I had to explain to her, being like, no, like this is, but like this is it, and also this framing narrative is correct. Like she was like, there's no way, and I'm like, no, this is like by the book.
I like the idea that the guy in the boat is doing the voices. So when the monster starts talking, the shipwrecked guy in the boat does the monster voice.
but yeah, I think it's cragginess and weirdness and slightly unrefined qualities probably help bring everything out in it. Because if you have an artwork that's too refined, it does kind of limit your perspective because you see that the artist is clearly giving you something. Or even if it's beautifully ambiguous, it's sort of shaped in such a way. Whereas a work that seems to be a bit jagged, a little bit all over the place, then really opens up a lot. Not every time. Sometimes it's just bad or just rubbish. But this one has such a powerful, the modern Prometheus thing. It's such a powerful inner idea that it can bloom in so many different directions. And it really gives you as the reader a lot of opportunity to mess with it, even just formally. Like it's like a triple nested story told. Is it the Arctic or Antarctica?
I think it's
Somewhere.
the Arctic, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
they're looking for the
Yeah.
passage. Yeah, and having this dreamlike intensity to it, in the same way that a dream isn't formally coherent.
Speak for yourself, buddy. 3-act structure every night.
With like prophecies that come true and such things. Dramatic
foreshadowing.
irony. Yeah, there's things that you know that the other characters in the dream don't. But yeah, in what am I talking about? Yeah, the coming from a dream. She has this dream. I think she said like it was when she was 16, and she'd been sitting on it for like years of her life of looking at her child and the child having yellow eyes that horrified her, and her realizing that she could not love her own child. And she didn't know what to do with this dream stuff, but it's just coming from deep in the subconscious. And then the ghostwriting competition just allows it to explode out.
Ghostwriting competition.
Yeah, or whatever it was, vampire competition. It's raining in Switzerland. Let's write spooky stories.
Yeah, spooky story time. But yeah, no, the like mother's like hood aspect to it is one that I earlier when I would speak to men about it, they'd be like, "What?" I'm like, yeah, the motherhood stuff, and they're like, "Is there motherhood stuff in here?" I'm like, "Yes, of course there isn't." Like, what do you mean? This is like when I was reading it, at uni, and everyone's like 19 and thinks that they know everything, me included, obviously. I was like, yeah, like the motherhood stuff in it is so like obvious about like how can you like what if you create something that you do not love and like then it has a mind of its own and like fuck what do you do?
Yeah, and and Mary, by being born, killed her own mother. That classic guilt that children of mothers who die in childbirth have. It's going. That's the thing I mean about it. It's going like extremely deep into like some psychological abscess there, and then this intellectual environment she would have been growing up with, like
yeah, if like your mother is Wollstonecraft,
yeah,
like
your mother's
fuck, that's a
Wollstonecraft.
hard fucking act to follow.
Yeah, your mother invents feminism, your father invents anarchism. Your new stepmom is what, like Byron's aunt, or I can't remember the crazy family tree of this. Godwin raises her like a super child with this crazy reading list, and then you're with Percy Shelley and Byron on like it's just such a crazy milieu of crazy like interesting ideas that she's surrounded in, and I think. An important aspect of it as well is that she is writing it at 19. This is a novel by a teenager, and because of that, it succeeds in this subterranean, strange, emotional gland world rather than the world of the intellect, in the place where Austen's novels succeed.
Yeah, and there's something interesting about reading her as well that like I'm currently reading Bonjour Tristesse. And like Françoise Sagan, like she was also like 18 when she wrote that, and I'm reading it like you fucking bitch. just like how could you possibly have written something so good and so insightful at such an unbelievably young age? It's like I don't think I've ever had like thoughts so clear like as like a fully formed adult, and you're doing this like as a goddamn teenager. Like that's crazy work.
Yeah, it's crazy. Specifically with women novelists like that. I think Carson McCullers, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. She's like 18 or 19 for that. Wuthering Heights, it's late teens, early 20s. These weird examples, and in all of those, it feels like that they are messy in a way, but they're also they're tapping into something. I think there are just certain thoughts that you also cannot express once you have a bit more prefrontal cortex
Yeah, it's like
development.
it feels like they like see these like open veins and then are like, I'm gonna put my finger like straight into this like pain point and just like twist it and see what happens because they're not old enough yet to know like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that because that's no fun. I don't think Tumblr is like a good analogy, but it always kind of feels like a little bit like that to me. I'm like the idea of being like that age and like fully like bearing all of your feelings out and like trying to like get them all out, like cutting yourself open, getting them all out to have a good look at them, being like, well, what is all of this? And then like you get some like absolute banger of like novels when they also happen to be very literally inclined and just have like that like raw fucking talent too.
Rock and roll, also a decent analogy.
Yeah,
in the
same
in the
thing.
same
Yeah,
way that,
totally.
people just suddenly
Only
become,
the young can do it.
yeah.
It's like as soon as they turn a certain
You're
age, lose all
31. It
talent.
doesn't matter if you're the best rock star in the universe. You just become lame at 30. There is no escape clause.
We want to be in bed by 9:30. Just be in bed at a reasonable hour and in like a comfortable chair, like
1820s. Let's go.
The barren
1820s.
decade. This has been a real struggle for most people on the show. They've been
Uh,
terrified by the 1820s.
I agree. Like it was a weird one. So unfortunately I've had to offer something that I haven't read yet, but it's very high on my TBR, so please do forgive me for the sin. It is Manzoni's Betrothed, which is 1827. So I feel like in terms of handling the 1820s, I think this is probably the best one, but I haven't read it yet. But it's one of the main things I want to read this year, god damn it. Because it is allegedly very, 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 very good. It's one of my mother's favorite novels. She asks me like every like couple months, being like, have you read it yet? I'm like, when I read it, you will know because I'm going to do nothing but bother you about it. Like, come on now. But it's like a found manuscript and it's set in, I think, 17th century Lombardy, which is at this point under Spanish rule. And then it's also set in like northern Italy and there's like famine and there's war. And of course, there are two lovers who cannot be together. So it's two lovers who wish to get married, but then all of this, like, again, in that like kind of Forrest Gump way, history just like gets in the way, which is pretty inconvenient. And so it's one that I'm super duper excited to read. It is allegedly very, very good. So, when I finally get around to reading it, I will be reporting back. But
My
have
Italy
either of
homies
have
have
either
been
of you
mad
read
at
it?
we for not reading this one as well.
Yeah.
It's like the stupid Italy lit people smack your head with this thing.
It's meant
It's
to be
nice to have
so
a
good.
a national novel. That seems to be sort of their one. I don't know. England's sort of a bit mixed because we got so obsessed with Mr. Shakespeare as our national
Yeah.
guy, and then embarrassed by Dickens for some reason, and haven't
It's
quite
because there's not a
built up the.
perfect one. I think
Yeah, yeah.
Middlemarch is kind of doing it. I
That's
think,
probably
yeah.
yeah. I think yeah. I think it should
Middlemarch
be
is
Middlemarch.
also one of my so only I think only one of my friends has read it. I do not claim the maturity to be able to read a novel of that length or complexity yet.
Very good.
Um,
Yeah.
but even my friend, she's incredibly well read and she's incredibly intelligent, and she was even like, I really had to like sometimes dip into listening to it as an audiobook in order to be able to keep going with it.
Bizarre, man. Bizarre. I think Middlemarch is quite a yarn. I know it's a weird take, but I think Middlemarch is quite a lot of fun to read. Even in the video that doesn't have Middlemarch in the time zone, it comes up. It
Yeah,
comes up
it has to
accidentally.
break through.
I mean,
Middlemarch.
we all have the books that we're like, no, but I know there's no connect. Like, I'm just going to shove this in anyway because I have to talk about it. The book that I do that with is The Leopard by Lampedusa.
Yeah.
It's like my favorite way to learn history, right? Like, I didn't even take history for GCSE. Like I've never studied it formally in any capacity. All of the history I know is like through reading novels, and watching YouTube videos. And like that one, The Leopard, in terms of seeing like people's personal lives, and this like sort of romance and stuff, but set against the backdrop of this massive like change that happens in Italy with the unification and Garibaldi and the Risorgimento. Like it's such an interesting way to learn about those things from kind of like well, an imagined point of view, because it's a historical novel, which I always forget. It's not a contemporary 19th century novel. It's from the 1950s, but it's just such an interesting way of like learning like that kind of history, apparently, like in theory, of like how the people who lived that history would have experienced it.
Should we go to the 1830s?
Yes, we shall, with one of my favorite novels of all time, The Charterhouse of Parma. I freaking love this book. It's Stendhal, and like lots of literary people will know, you will all like The Charterhouse of Parma and hate The Red and the Black, or vice versa. There seems to be no possibility of loving them both. I absolutely hate The Red and the Black. I thought that novel was absolute shit. I hated it so much. So my mum was like, now you have to read The Charterhouse of Parma. And I was like, but what if it's crap? I don't want to read it. And she's like, no, you'll have a good time. And my lecturer as well, because she was teaching a module on like the French Revolutionary effect. And this was one of the ones she chose for that. And she was like, no, I mean, you're going to love it. This is, set in the early 19th century. It is about the Napoleonic Wars, about the Restoration period. It is one that starts, well, we follow Fabritz, who he starts out as a young teenage boy who, of course, like all teenage boys at the time do, wants to go run off and join Napoleon. You know, it just always...
This
all
option
love
wasn't
Napoleon.
open to me, but it's a shame. What could have been?
I mean, I think we all know people who would have definitely run off to join the Napoleonic army. Or maybe that's just like my set of friends. But yeah, like it's
They
a
all
really...
wear bicorns and telescopes.
They just want to join in. So yeah, it's such like a like adventure novel, but again, that kind of like Forrest Gump sort of thing. But I guess it makes a lot of sense that a lot of these are like the historical novels, but only looking back like a couple decades and sort of inserting their own characters into these big historical moments in order to make sense of them, and you know, sort of retrospectively, I guess, I'll process it, which I think makes a lot of sense. And so I think it's such a fun adventure novel, and I think you would learn, if if anybody hasn't read it, you'd learn so much about Napoleon, and then you start to realize that like all of the 19th century, just all roads lead back to Napoleon. That's like what I've come the last like 2 years since reading the last book on the list that I have. If you have a question about the 19th century, the answer is always very begrudgingly Napoleon. And yeah, it's just, I think it's such like an enjoyable novel, and there's just like, you know, you just wanders onto the battlefield and is like, I don't know what's going on. I think it's a really interesting depiction of war on a battlefield, and I think the only other one that I liked as much as this one was in War and Peace. But then, you know, with War
It
and
was
Peace,
based on it as well. I mean, Tolstoy.
but like with Tolstoy, it can still be very omniscient. Whereas with this, you're just like, from Fabriz's point of view, being like, oh my fucking god, there's so many horses. What do I do? Who are the bad guys? What's going on? So it's also like fun. The other thing that I really like about it, especially the earlier part of it, is like seeing teenagers in literature, like especially teenagers in like in classics, because I think they almost like kind of, you feel like they're ignored, or just that like their like a historical understanding of teenagers is so different, because we treat them now very much still as children, where historically speaking, they're not treated as much as children, because by that point they may have already been expected to be married and have children. So I think this idea of like when you reach maturity is quite different. So being able to read someone where you're like, this is a teenage boy behaving like a teenage boy, I think is like very fun. It's like Prison Escapes, and it's like, you know, and it's a wild ride, and I like thoroughly recommend it to everyone. It's just like one of my favorite novels ever.
A friend and I both decided we wanted to write like a little short novel, like a 40,000 word thing, and we decided we'd select the titles in advance by opening up to a random page on the Charterhouse of Parma. My title was "Urgent Business Summoned Him to Bologna."
That's such a good way of like, oh, that's so fun.
Let's go to the final one, 1840s.
The final one is one of my favorite reading achievements. I'm going to call it that once you see what it is. And also another one that I like desperately need everybody to read. and another one where all roads lead to Napoleon. It is, of course, The Count of Monte Cristo, because I'm ending in the 1840s, so it has to be The Count of Monte Cristo. Um, how to even like briefly summarize this, all 1,243 pages of my edition. Um, I was gonna say it's a wild ride. It feels like reading like a high-end TV series. It genuinely is one of the most delightfully fun and like almost like luxurious reads ever, in terms of like it is like pure action and pace and just like plot. Well, it begins with like Napoleon's 100 Days, and it is about false imprisonment and about just an epic revenge arc. And it is set across the south of France, Marseille. It is set across Rome, got a little bit of a grand tour thing going on, and it's set in high society Paris. It hits every single thing that I like and enjoy in a novel, and it's also written in such like a just such a fun way. And yeah, and then you get this like really fun, interesting like pan view almost of 19th century society from so many different angles. And in my opinion, this book can do no wrong. It's a wild ride. It is considerably easier to read than I think people think it is. The only thing about it is that it's long, but everything else about it is so very, very deeply accessible. So I'd say it's even though it's this long, it is definitely beginner friendly in my opinion.
It is all of your novels combined as well. Your
Yeah,
description of it is every single novel on this list.
it is. It's like, but that's like what it feels like it's been building up to. I feel like when you look at the order of these novels, you kind of go like, oh yeah, it makes sense, but then it would like culminate, well not culminate, because all the like good stuff that comes after. But like this period, like just on the other couple things on my list, but I haven't included formally for this list, but like, this is technically published 1844 to 45 because it's published in serialization, which also means that like every chapter ends on a cliffhanger. So you're like, oh, I know it's already 2 o'clock in the morning, but I'm just going to read one more chapter. And they're like, oh shit, it's light outside, which I didn't think I did that with this. And I like haven't done that since I was a child or like a teenager or stuff, like reading like, I don't know, like I was going to say Twilight, but I actually only read the first Twilight. Yeah, just being able to like binge read something, so fun. But yeah, this is like officially finally published in together in 1846, and then like in 1847 then you get Jane Eyre and you get Wuthering Heights. A year after that you get White Nights by Dostoevsky. Like this is kind of this beginning of this era of just bangers basically in the 19th century.
This is the interesting period, your entire list of people trying to figure out what this form is. And I feel
It's like, what can we do here with all of these words?
Exactly. And by the 1840s, it's codified. But yeah, I think even something like Frankenstein, where it's like it's a story and a story and a story and all the insane structural decisions. I think had Mary Shelley been born 50 years later, it might have looked a lot more standard, looked a lot more kind of formally coherent, just because and the same thing happens with kind of every art form in its early days, and think to like silent cinema or to like the early classical music. It's just this strange experimental period lasting for either a century or a few decades before we've like nailed down what this thing is. And then you get to just fire on all cylinders and get the amazing Dumas and Dickens and George Eliot and all of and Tolstoy and the sort of golden age of the novel.
No, absolutely, especially when I like that like shift to that interiority that you get with characters that you see with Stendhal doing that, like kind of like psychological realism pops up there for those like first like few times, and then but you're right, like it becomes so codified, especially with Jane Eyre, like dear reader, I'm like, oh, she knows we're in the room with her. Okay, cool. But I think that's why I quite enjoyed putting together this list, so thank you so much for having me, by the way.
It's been a pleasure, thank you.
Yeah, our pleasure.
It's just like such fun to see how like these things like change and evolve, and I think so much of understanding classics, and I say this so often, is that you can't look at these things as individual texts. And it's one of the biggest things I think I took from my degree, was that you have to kind of see everything in relationship to everything else, like these authors that you read were reading other people and they were experiencing these historical periods, and they were just not, they didn't just sit down and write in a vacuum. These people are reading and writing, and they have lots of them their own libraries and their, their own tastes, and these things all work together to drive this change in how the novel is evolving, and seeing all like fun stuff that you can just do with words and the stories that you can tell. And so I think having a look at things in chronological order is interesting, because you can really see those leaps and that progression and those changes. That's kind of why I wanted to start a bit earlier than some of the other episodes that you guys have done, because you can really see how it like leads up to all of these things. And I think that these novels, these early novels, really have very interesting things that like make them stand up on their own, but then to look at them all and go, okay, you can see where the novel is going with this and like how this progresses and changes. If anybody like writes, like you understand that you stand on the shoulders of giants, you are the product of everything that you have read, and you can only ever write well if you read well. You can tell when someone writes something and hasn't ever read anything, because they think that like nobody can tell that they used Claude or ChatGPT. I know that you use Claude. Like, please stop. I have a friend of mine who can like tell which version of like Claude or ChatGPT you used, which I think is absolutely crazy.
3.7 alpha build. It's
Yeah,
gotta be.
no, really, no, it's honestly crazy. You are what you eat, and you very much absolutely are what you read. The most important thing is to just read so widely and so varied. And I think that's what, again, is so fun about classics, is like my whole thing that I like going on about is like classics is not a genre. Classics is just the good stuff, historically speaking. There's so much variation in it that, you should, gosh, read as much as possible. There's so much good stuff out there. Like, why would you deny yourself that by saying like, oh, I'm scared to read classics? It's like, no, read the Wikipedia. Like, read a bit of Wikipedia, watch a bit of YouTube, you're sorted. Just go for it.
You can time travel. Like, that's the...
Yeah, exactly. Like, what do you mean? I'm like suddenly accidentally on the battlefield of Waterloo. Like, what do you mean I'm not supposed to be here? Like, in a teenage boy's brain. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's the female Quixote is the whole thing. It's like she reads all of this romance stuff and becomes that. You can fill your brain with what you want to, and you won't become exactly what it seems, but you are the outcome of all the input. It's not just books, it's everything else as well. But it's an interesting way to look at it. And you can see it in authors and saying, well, what has gone in their brain to extrude this with a bit of originality, kind of meddling the alchemical motion in the brain. But yeah, it's interesting when we were making our lists and seeing other people making their lists, not only what they expected, but what they were surprised to see, but it made sense. These themes that run through, it's like, I didn't realize I was interested in that in particular. Because it's often hard. There are some people, if you're like an emo, if you're a goth, if you're a punk, easy to tell someone what you like because you've shaped your identity around it. And maybe even as an enjoyer of classics, well, I enjoy the classics. But when you actually look into the thread that links them together, you might not have realized, oh, I like this square of virtue rewarded, virtue honor. Maybe this is it's something that's been lingering in your taste, but you can only really see it when you look at it. But it has maybe informed your creativity or your selections or the things you like or don't like, the reason you like Charterhouse with Parma and don't like the red and the black, all of these interlocking motions. And it's, I think, in a time where we're slightly less separated into these cultural niches because you don't have to be. It used to be to have a music taste, you'd have to invest a lot of money, so you got to pick what you like.
Yeah, get weird hair and...
yeah, you don't want to risk getting that jazz record if you've got all this rock and roll, because, that's like, 15 quid down the drain. But now that we can be omnivorous, I think there is a sense of losing a bit of who you are. What is your identity? Yeah, I read everything. I listen to everything. But usually not true. Usually there is some of it that is crawling up the brain a little bit more than the other stuff. And that's sometimes just to try and break it down, you see, this is kind of the pillar of books that is me.
Yeah, it's like patterns revealed, isn't it? It's like, oh, I think it's random and there's just so much to choose from. But when you like extract it, you're like, oh, I see why I like these ones.
Love social climbing. I just
just like women behaving badly, and then like people being like, oh, it's moral. Like, yeah, it's an example of what you shouldn't be doing. I'm like, yes, women behaving badly. I shouldn't be doing any of this. Awesome. I'll remember that.